It all started with a simple noise complaint, but what unraveled next was something straight out of a courtroom thriller. In a quiet suburban neighborhood run by a strict homeowners association, one woman, known around the block for her constant meddling and over-the-top HOA enforcement, took things way too far. Residents had nicknamed her HOA Karen because of how she patrolled the streets like it was her personal mission to control every lawn, trash can, and mailbox. But when she tried to silence one of her neighbors by dragging them to court over a so-called HOA violation, things took a shocking turn. During the hearing, the judge began noticing something odd. Some of the key documents submitted by Karen didn't quite add up. Signatures didn't match. Dates were off. And then the truth came out. Karen had allegedly forged official HOA paperwork to strengthen her case, an act that would soon land her in more trouble than she could have imagined. The courtroom went silent as the judge made an unexpected move that left everyone stunned. What happened next? Let's just say, the power she thought she had came crashing down in front of everyone. But this story isn't just about fake signatures or HOA drama. It's about what happens when someone tries to manipulate the system and finally gets caught. Stay tuned, because the real twist is just getting started. To understand how it all spiraled out of control, you have to go back a few months before the court drama. Karen wasn't just a regular HOA board member. She saw herself as the ultimate rule enforcer. She walked the neighborhood daily with a clipboard, snapping photos of overgrown grass, trash bins left out too long, and even chalk drawings on sidewalks. Most neighbors tried to avoid conflict, brushing off her complaints and warnings. But things got tense when she started targeting one particular family, a quiet couple who had just moved in and barely had time to unpack. Karen hit them with multiple HOA violation notices almost immediately. First, it was a non-compliant mailbox, then unauthorized garden decorations, and finally, a claim that they had violated zoning rules by installing a small shed in their backyard, something the previous owners had already gotten approved. The couple, confused and overwhelmed, tried to fight back with paperwork and emails showing they were in the clear. But Karen kept pushing, eventually filing a formal complaint and taking them to small claims court. That's when things started to feel off. The couple noticed that some documents submitted by Karen had details they'd never seen before, strangely specific violations, odd formatting, and even a signature that looked suspiciously familiar. Something didn't sit right, and they weren't the only ones who noticed. As the court date got closer, the couple started digging. They reached out to other neighbors, some of whom had their own stories about Karen's aggressive HOA tactics. One elderly resident shared how she'd received a fine for having a holiday wreath up past regulation, and another said Karen once demanded a backyard playset be removed because it was too brightly colored. These weren't just isolated incidents, they were part of a bigger pattern. But what really raised eyebrows was when one neighbor mentioned seeing Karen walking out of the HOA office late one evening, long after hours, carrying a stack of folders. Meanwhile, the couple decided to get their hands on the official HOA archives for their property. What they found completely contradicted the complaint Karen had filed in court. The shed, approved 3 years ago, the garden decor, within guidelines, and the so-called non-compliant mailbox, installed by the builder, along with every other one on the block. That's when they took a closer look at the signed approval forms Karen had submitted to the judge. One signature, supposedly from a former HOA chair who had moved out last year, looked off. A quick phone call confirmed their suspicion. He never signed anything. Still, Karen kept her cool in public. At the next HOA meeting, she acted like nothing was wrong. But behind the scenes, pressure was building. People were talking, questions were being asked, and what looked like a small neighbor dispute was quickly turning into something much bigger. With the court date just days away, the couple decided to bring everything they had to their attorney: copies of the original HOA documents, email threads, and even a recorded phone call with the former HOA chair confirming he never signed any recent forms. Their lawyer immediately spotted the red flags and added forgery to the defense argument. Word of the potential forged documents spread quietly through the neighborhood. Suddenly, Karen wasn't patrolling the sidewalks with the same confidence. Her usual allies on the HOA board started distancing themselves, unsure of what she might have dragged them into. At the courthouse, tension filled the air. As the hearing began, the judge quickly honed in on the disputed documents. Page after page was questioned. When the allegedly forged signature came up, the judge paused and held up both versions, one from the HOA archives and the one submitted by Karen. The difference was clear, even from across the room. Karen tried to explain, claiming it must have been a clerical error, but her voice shook. Then the judge asked a direct question, one that made the room go completely silent. Even the clerks stopped typing. What happened next would change everything. The judge leaned forward and asked, "Can you explain why this signature appears to be traced from an older document in the HOA archives?" Karen froze. Her lips parted like she was about to answer, but no words came out. Everyone in the room could feel the shift. But just when it seemed like the pressure couldn't build any more, something completely unexpected happened. The couple's attorney stood up and handed the judge a printed email thread. It was from another HOA board member, and it revealed a second layer to the story. Turns out, Karen hadn't acted alone. The emails hinted at a quiet plan within the HOA to push out non-compliant homeowners, mostly new residents who hadn't lived in the neighborhood long or didn't know how to challenge the rules. Karen may have been the face of it, but others had helped. One message even suggested adjusting property records and inspection dates to make violations seem real. The judge's expression turned cold as he flipped through the pages. What started as a simple case of signature forgery was now pointing toward a coordinated effort to manipulate HOA authority and mislead the court. Gasps echoed around the room. The couple exchanged stunned looks. Karen's face went pale, and as the judge called for a short recess, it was clear this was no longer just a neighbor dispute. It was something much deeper and far from over. When court resumed, the atmosphere had completely changed. Karen returned to her seat visibly shaken, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her binder. The judge didn't waste any time. He reviewed the new evidence slowly, then asked if Karen had anything more to add. She stood, voice low, trying to explain that everything she did was in the best interest of the community. But the judge cut her off and firmly reminded her that forging documents and misleading the court were criminal offenses, not HOA policies. But just as it seemed like the dust was settling, there was one last twist. After the hearing, the couple learned that several other neighbors had come forward during the recess, each with stories, emails, and documents showing how long this pattern of targeting had been going on. What Karen started wasn't just her personal crusade, it might have exposed an entire HOA scandal. Then came the moment no one expected. The judge announced that not only was the case against the couple dismissed with prejudice, but he was referring the matter to the district attorney for potential charges. A courtroom officer approached Karen as whispers broke out behind the benches. Her binder slipped from her hands as she realized this was real. She wasn't just losing control of the neighborhood, she might be facing legal consequences that would follow her for years. But just as it seemed like the dust was settling, there was one last twist. After the hearing, the couple learned that several other neighbors had come forward during the recess, each with stories, emails, and documents showing how long this pattern of targeting had been going on. What Karen started wasn't just her personal crusade, it might have exposed an entire HOA scandal. In the weeks that followed the courtroom drama, everything changed in the neighborhood. Karen stepped down from the HOA board, and an interim leadership team was put in place while an official investigation moved forward. The community, once quiet and divided, began coming together. Neighbors who barely spoke before were now sharing stories, checking on one another, and helping rebuild trust. The couple who had been dragged into court, they were cleared of all accusations and received a written apology from the HOA, along with a promise of better transparency moving forward. Local news picked up the story, reporting on how one resident's obsession with control led to an HOA scandal involving forged documents, abuse of power, and court intervention. But more importantly, it sparked real change. New rules were introduced to protect homeowners from unchecked authority, and residents were finally given a voice in how things were run. The biggest takeaway: when people stand up for what's right and refuse to stay silent, even the most tangled mess of lies can unravel. This wasn't just about HOA rules or fake signatures. It was about accountability. And in the end, the truth didn't just come out, it made sure this kind of thing would never happen again.